Welcome to Whisperwood Stories. Today, we read 3 stories from r/paranormal. Let's begin. Our first story is from Private Poultry. Someone came home from the hospital with us. This occurred over 20 years ago, but it still feels fresh in my mind. My son was born early at 32 weeks. We were lucky, and he had few issues, and we were able to bring him home after a month from when he was born. He came home on oxygen and caffeine due to bradycardia. Once we were home, strange things began to happen. The cat refused to go in his room, and before he was born, I was forever removing said cat from his room. Our dog would sit at the bottom of the stairs and tilt his head as if he was listening to something. I would be changing his diaper and start talking as I thought his dad had just come into the room, only to turn and find out that I was alone. A friend gave him a peekaboo Big Bird toy that would say peekaboo when you covered and then uncovered its eyes. This toy would go off all of the time, even after I put it into a box in the closet. I often felt that I was not alone in that house. My parents had given us an Angel Care baby monitor as a gift. This had a pad that was placed under the mattress, and an alarm would sound if it did not detect any movement after a certain amount of time. As our son was tiny, only 5 pounds when he came home, this alarm would often go off. I would wake up, walk into his room, turn it off and check on him. He was always fine, and I never felt that it was anything but the fact that he was so tiny that the pad didn't pick up his breathing. During this time, I would often sit and dream of a woman I would find in his room. I never saw her directly, but would dream that I saw the shadow of a woman with long hair standing and reaching into his crib. The dreams never scared me, but I did find them very odd but comforting at the same time. I can't remember how long he had been home, but it was at least a month. He was still on oxygen and still on caffeine. Our bed was to the left of our bedroom door, and I slept on the right-hand side, next to the door, and my husband slept on the left side. I was asleep and was woken up by being shaken roughly on the right side of the bed. I woke up and looked over at my husband and asked why he was shaking me, only to realize that he was completely asleep and on the wrong side to have shaken me. I immediately jumped up and ran to my son's room. I flipped the light on, something I had never done up to this point, and heard a gasp from the crib. Often, when babies spontaneously stop breathing, you just need to startle them to begin again. I truly believe that he had stopped breathing, and my turning on the light startled him back into it again. After this episode, the dreams and strange occurrences with the pets and toy continued, until my son came off of oxygen and caffeine. Once that happened, the odd occurrences stopped. The pets stopped acting weird, and the Big Bird toy never went off on its own again. I believe that someone came home with him to keep him safe. The feeling I got from my dreams was that it was a young woman, maybe early to mid-20s. I will always be grateful for them watching over him and shaking me awake that night so I could startle my son into breathing again. Our second story is from Control-Delete. A visit from Lilith. In my late 20s, I got a position as a chef in a professional kitchen. And as some of you may know, there are always some characters that work in back of house. There was one guy, Ed, who was around my age that immediately gave off woo-woo vibes. Super into alchemy, numerology, religions, meanings and symbols, stuff that was very out of my wheelhouse, but I enjoyed listening to his ramblings. Soon after starting my job, I moved into a huge house that was built around the 1920s that had been recently renovated to split into 2 apartments, the upstairs, where I lived, and the downstairs, where no one lived. It was definitely a weird layout, but it was huge for the price, a great location, and I loved the quirkiness of it. There was a grand front staircase and a back staircase that ended at a little mini door that led into the backyard. There were random doorways, lots of twists and turns, old fragile French doors, a clawfoot tub, weird cubby holes, a big deck off of one of the bedrooms, and tons of old windows, even in the closets. It sort of reminded me of that weird maze house in California, only located in OKC. Around that time, I was also just beginning to get into wine. I knew absolutely nothing about it, but figured as a chef, I should have some knowledge, and would grab a random bottle every Monday to try out the following Friday. This is relevant for later. I had only lived in my place for about 2 full days at this point, when Ed came up to me during the middle of our shift and said that I was going to get a visit tonight. Thinking he was trying to invite himself over to hang out, I jokingly pressed, "Oh yeah? By who? You?" His face showed zero emotion, and he just muttered, "Lilith," and walked off. I sat there for a second, thought, I don't know a Lilith. Never recall even hearing that name before. Does she work here? Eventually, I just brushed it off as another weird rambling from Ed and went on about the rest of my shift. We finished up, got out of there around 3 p.m., and I headed home to kick off my weekend with a nice hot meal and a glass of wine. I walked through the front door that was self-locking once shut, up the stairs, through the second floor door, yes really, and then headed down the long hallway to my bedroom. That was the very back room at the opposite end of the house. I go in and change as I'm finishing up, decide that I'll do takeout for dinner. I order some food from a Greek place just 2 blocks away, hop in my car, and am back within 10 minutes of me leaving. I sit on my couch and start enjoying my meal, end up cracking open my bottle of wine and starting a movie. After only a few minutes, I get a little chilly. Lots of windows, I tell ya, and head towards my bedroom to grab some socks and a blanket. I can see the door to my bedroom from the couch, and it was shut, just as I had left it. Could not believe what I saw when I opened the door. My dresser, a 5-foot-tall, heavy, full-wood antique dresser that was once up against the back wall, is now on the ground. Not only was it on the ground, but it had somehow turned a complete 180 degrees to where the drawers were facing up, and all of the contents, my clothes, some art pieces, etc., were all thrown everywhere around the room. I couldn't move. I don't even think it was fear at this point. It was such an impossible scenario that I was just staring because my brain wasn't processing it. Eventually, I snapped back to reality and freaked out. How the hell did this happen? I would have heard it. It had to have happened in the literal 10 minutes I was gone grabbing my food. How did it flip? That's impossible. It'd be one thing if it just fell over, but in order for the drawers to be facing up, my spine ran cold. Someone did this. Someone angry. Someone still in my house. But the door self-locks. But what if it didn't this time? I called my boyfriend, who lived down the street, to come over now. He was there within minutes, and we proceeded to search the house, every closet, every cubby, the back staircase, the little door. Everything was in its place. Everything just as I had left it. All access to outside locked and bolted. I couldn't process it. It made no sense. Why just the dresser in the very back? The most complicated room to get to, and nothing else? I had no answer. I just shut myself down. I tried to be as pragmatic as I could in the situation and began cleaning up the mess. My boyfriend helped, as the dresser was too heavy for me to lift up alone. And then he decided to stay the night to help calm the nerves I was trying to ignore. After finishing up, we settled down on the couch to finish my movie and finally have a glass of wine. I poured mine and handed the bottle to my boyfriend. He remarked that the label was sort of creepy looking, with the imagery of a winged woman with a crow's head. I looked over and noticed a name on the bottle. Lilith. Our last story is from Major Tom. Night security guard, paranormal experience. Continuing on from my last post here, when I was about around 4 to 5 years old. I am now 29 and work as a security guard doing nights in the UK. The site I usually do my duty at is in the northwest of England, but I will not give the name of the site or specific area to get my job secure. This is going to be a long-winded post, but I am confident that anybody interested in the paranormal will be satisfied. So here goes. So I was in the army at the time when one of my closest friends landed this job first. He was always a very hardcore skeptic, but started to tell me that he was experiencing things that were weird and freaking him out sometimes. After the army, I went into a couple of random jobs, whilst I got my momentum back in regular life and also got myself an SIA license. Eventually, my pal got shipped off to another site for the same customer, and I jumped at the opportunity to work in his place. My pal, let's call him Jason, kindly drove me to the site for my induction to meet the guard on duty that night. The guard on duty was a very down-to-earth man in his 50s, and after showing me the ropes, the whole 5 minutes, he asked me what I think about poltergeists. I told him briefly about some of the experiences I have had throughout my life, and his eyes lit up, which has sparked a casual friendship ever since. Basically, he told me about 2 guards leaving in the past due to strange things happening at the site, and that every guard has experienced at least one thing here. He's a lot deeper into this stuff than I am, but it adds to his harmless charm, and we have shared many deep conversations about the subject. Saturday night, during the Christmas holidays in 2018, I locked myself in for the first time and was ready to spend the next 12 hours alone, enjoying my own company and getting paid for it. My gaming laptop came straight out, albeit on a whisper of volume, of course, and frequent heads up in case of intruders or van drivers coming to collect their personal vehicles. This place is quite creepy looking, as it is out in the sticks somewhat and surrounded by farmland. But I am very used to cutting about in the dark in places similar from my time in the army, so it was just whatever to me. For the first few shifts, I just heard an odd, strange noise which, quite frankly, could have been anything from temperature expansion or contraction to wildlife. However, on the night prior to the staff returning for work in 2019, I had one of the most profound paranormal experiences of my life, which genuinely scared me. It was my 3 to 4 a.m. hourly patrol. I stepped off at about 3:30, and as one foot was put out of the guardroom door, a tiny stone whizzed around the guardroom, bouncing off of metal lockers, desks, etc. at head or torso height. I am 6 feet tall. This didn't make any sense, but I shrugged it off and continued on my way. The first part of my patrol involved walking around the back of a 2-story, medium-sized office building where there are lots of stone pebbles to walk on, before coming out from the back of the offices and into a relatively large car park, about 2/3 the size of a football pitch. As soon as I stepped foot on the tarmac, a pebble landed right next to me, and I thought nothing of it. I could have easily kicked one up a bit with my steel-toe boots and not felt it, whatever. I got halfway across the car park, and another landed just in front of me, as if it came from behind me. This is where I started to feel that things were quite right, as the pebbles were way back by this point, and I would have felt them this time due to the added force of it. I continued, and at the end of the car park were a row of shipping containers on the left and a huge biffa skip on the right. The patrol route takes me walking in between these for about 30 meters. And this is by far the creepiest part of the site, as it is so dark and dingy. This is where things began to get intense. I was still walking towards this area, and roughly 20 meters away, when another pebble hit the biffa skip loudly, about 5 to 6 feet high. In other words, I would have to get a bit of a run-up and put effort into booting a pedal hard enough to get it to hit high enough and to match the force it hit with. This really startled me. I stood still and confused for about 30 seconds, looking all around myself. But there was nobody. And I was equipped with a 400 lumen heavy-duty torch, so I could see for quite a distance. There was nobody whatsoever. I reluctantly carried on, down the alley, past the skip that had just been hit and the shipping containers to my left. I had gotten about 10 meters past the first shipment container when it sounded as if somebody ran up to it with a sledgehammer and gave it a massive whack. My backside almost swallowed my pants whole, and it took every ounce of courage not to immediately run back to the car park and shine my torch in all directions. If this was a human, due to the layout of the site, they couldn't have gotten away in time unless they could contest Usain Bolt. And even that would be a stretch, considering it probably took me 2 seconds to sprint there, if that. The guard who gave me the induction is so interested in this stuff that he told me to call him if anything like this happened, no matter the hour. So I continued to the center of the car park to get a full view of the site, but of course, nobody was there. Suddenly, I just heard a bunch of bang sounds coming from all directions, but confined to be within the site, shortly followed by tiny stones constantly whizzing past my shins with a low trajectory, similar to how one would throw skimming stones across a body of water. The thing is about these stones whizzing past me is that the direction they were coming from was a huge 3-story high warehouse with no windows or doors from my point of view. So these tiny stones were being thrown at me from an unseen force for 100% certainty, as all that was there were 3 stories of brick wall. Never once did any of them hit me, just whizzed past my legs, left and right. Behind this warehouse is a river that gets quite choppy in winter, but even so, the trajectory dictated that the stones were definitely being thrown from in front of me and not over the warehouse, which would be next to impossible anyway. I rang the other guard, and he could immediately hear the racket going on. He told me to go by the river and call out to it. Now, despite having a few experiences sparsely throughout my life, I have never been interested in engaging with whatever the phenomena is, but I decided to humor him anyway, all the while crapping my pants. I called out to it. Can't remember what I said, and everything immediately stopped and went silent. Nothing further happened that night, and the other guard said that he's never known anybody to get terrorized quite that badly by it. Once the staff arrived, I spoke to one of the others managing the site, and he said that he would check the CCTV footage for any messers. Interestingly, the next shift a couple of days later, the cleaner, who used to be around for a couple of hours after staff leave, called me into the office block to see a document printed out as an email. This was to my security firm, but stated that they could not see anybody or any stones on camera, but could see me doing an intense investigation and being violently startled a few times. Since then, I've had very sparse experiences such as doors slamming, a filled mop bucket moving 3 feet from the wall in front of my eyes, plates smashing in the canteen, very annoying, as security often gets blamed for this, understandably. cutlery having a quick jangle in the canteen drawer, a loud sound of what can only be described as heavy cardboard boxes being dragged along dusty warehouse floors, and footsteps coming from the room above. A few months into the job, I also got another very close friend job there, who was also in the army, and also a massive skeptic until now. He literally laughed at Jason and I while we gave him his introduction when we mentioned the strange stuff. Jason to this day references his cocky laugh as his attitude soon to get straight. So a few nights into my other friend, let's call him Scott, working there, I got woken up to a phone call at about 1:30 a.m. and it's Scott with a trembly voice saying that somebody had just sprinted up the stairs, ran throughout the short corridor, and is currently standing outside of the guardroom door. I said, well, you're a security guard. Do your job and see who it is. Of course, nobody was there, and nobody could be there due to the coded doors. I haven't experienced anything paranormal there for a long time now. It seems to have been weeks, months of calm followed by short bursts of activity. I have also since branched out and done all of the sites my company contracts with, and never had an experience elsewhere besides this one place, which I have video evidence of. I have one more story about an experience in my teens for another time. But that's all, folks. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you for listening to Whisperwood Stories. If you enjoyed, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe down below. Do you have a story that you'd like me to read here? Consider commenting or sending it to whisperwoodsubmissions@gmail.com. The stories in this video were read and slightly altered with the author's permissions. Thank you again for listening, and be sure to check out the original Reddit posts. Don't let the shadows get too close.